Welcome to the Tim Heale podcast. In this episode, I'm going to have a chat with Dylan. Dylan's going to tell us all about his life. So, Dylan, if you can tell me when and where you were born, and if you can describe what it was like, where you grew up, the schools you went to, and the education you received.
Certainly. Tim, thanks for having me, first of all.
You're welcome.
I was born in Janesville, Wisconsin in 1990. So February 9th, 1990 is my birthday. Just turned 32. It's interesting because I've never been asked this question before to describe my education and things like that. Mostly because I don't really remember it all that much. I lost my dad to suicide at 6 years old. So like anything prior to 6, I really don't have much of a memory of. And then anything following, what I remember is really tailoring my experience around not having to tell people about that, not having to talk about that thing, that awkward thing that happened to my family. And so the few things that I do remember is like I went to Adams Elementary in Janesville. And then once my dad died, we stayed there for roughly a year, and then we moved out to a town called Johnson Creek, or Johnstown Center, excuse me. And I went to Milton School District, and Milton is just it's a very small town, 5,000, small town for my area. Education was pretty rural. So there's a lot of farm kids around, and relatively few city kids. And I was one of those city kids that I was just there, right? I love to read. I kind of stayed to myself a lot. I only kind of hung out around kids that generally made me feel somewhat comfortable, and that didn't really happen until I think 5th or 6th grade. But the education was rural America, right? Like we learned the basics, didn't really dig deep into the education. For me, my education really came from outside of school. Because of the trauma that I kind of went into or faced, I really dug into war history. It's just something I really kind of connected with, and I started learning about World War II and Vietnam. My mom's boyfriend after my dad was a Vietnam veteran and had just a ton of history books, history movies. Back then it was VCR. And that's where I really got a lot of my education, is I was like, World War II in color on VCR. And I would just watch all of these, old war history movies, learn about the Civil War, learn about World War One. And that's kind of where I kind of pushed myself into learning. In school, I did enough to be an A student, and I just tried to go under the radar. I didn't try to make myself exemplary or any way. I didn't want to draw too much attention to myself. I was just trying to get things, kosher, so I didn't have to deal with any problems at home in terms of that. But I was smart enough to get A's. But that's not really where I put a lot of my effort.
Yeah.
But yeah, into high school is when I started getting bullied. I was a super scrawny kid. Like right now I'm 6'4", like 240 pounds. I'm a lean, well-built dude. But back then I was about the same height, 6'1", 6'2", 150 pounds. So I was paper thin. And people made fun of me for that. And, it kind of sent me into this insecure mindset of trying to prove myself, along with what happened with my dad. And that in itself was kind of a push for me to prove myself, in many ways to him. But in school, it was kind of another added effect. And that's what kind of drew me to the military around 17 years old. So I joined the military when I was still in high school.
Mm-hmm. So what age were you then? What, 17, 18?
Yep. I joined when I was 17. I actually went to basic training when I was 18.
Okay. Where did you do your basic training?
Fort Benning, Georgia, the hottest place on the planet. At least it felt like it that day.
Is that kind of where all of the army training's done, is it?
Not all of it. Back then, it was infantry only. So I joined the military and became an infantryman. And back then, Fort Benning was the only place you could do infantry training. I think that's still the case, but they also opened it up to other MOSs as well, which was not. I don't think it was always the case back then. That was about 2008 when I went.
And how long was the training at Fort Benning?
I think 16 weeks. So it was about 3 to 4 months.
Yeah. Okay. And at the end of it, you come out as a fully qualified infantry soldier.
Fully qualified is a relative term. There's
Did the same here, you know, guys go through CATRIC, and which is the infantry training centre in this country, and then they come out of it qualified as an infantry soldier.
yeah.
And then they go off to the battalions, and that's
Right.
when they start to learn the real skills of being soldiering.
Right, exactly. And that's
Exactly
the
the
same with us. Is you go to basic training and you learn all the general understandings of the tactics, the weapons, all the things that you absolutely need to know to have conversations with the people that you get to, when you get to your units, and your units tell you, hey, this is actually how you do it the right way. And yeah, so yeah, I was qualified. I think I came out, I think it was Halloween of 2008 when I graduated basic training and AIT, which is our advanced individual training. That's the infantryman qualifier. Yeah, and I came home. I'm pretty sure it was November 1st. They came home back to the world.
So, where was your first posting? Where did they post you off to once you finished your basic training and you kind of qualified? Where did you go next?
So I'm National Guard. So how that works in the United States is you're based within your state. So I joined the Wisconsin Army National Guard, and when I came home from basic training, my first unit was Bravo Company out of Green Bay, Wisconsin. So if you've ever heard of the Green Bay Packers, it was we're a stone's throw from the stadium up there, and that unit, we meet 1 week in a month. We'll do a couple weeks in the summer to do active duty time, but that's all we do. So like when we're talking about being stationed guard wise, Wisconsin Guard, we're stationed in a city, in an armory, and very very simply we meet whenever the unit deems necessary that month, and we do our training.
So that's like we have over here. We have the reserves.
Yep.
And then you go off and you've got a civilian job as well.
Yep.
So if you're National Guard, then so what was your civilian job?
At the time, I was doing school. So I came right out of basic training and went right into school.
What, high school or college?
Yeah. So our universities. So the really great thing about the National Guard is like you get all of your college tuition reimbursed. Basically, you pay it up front and then you get it reimbursed once you pass your classes. So it was basically a full-time job for me. Is what school was, and that was really only part of what drew me to the military, but it was something that was super beneficial at the time.
Yeah. So what college course did you do?
I started with history, but I did not stay there. I really, again, always loved history, but I found myself kind of not enjoying, when I look at the degree of history, I was like, the only thing I can do is kind of become a teacher with this. There's not like I could maybe become a historian, but at the same time, like to me, that's not something that I felt was going to be beneficial to what I wanted to do. And I wanted to help people in some way. I didn't know how. Back then, I was super young and I didn't understand at all anything about life. And so ultimately, after about a year and a half of going to school at Green Bay, I decided to transfer to Whitewater, which was a lot closer to my home, or my hometown down in Janesville, and started studying sociology, which was to me, a more beneficial thing to study in terms of understanding what's here and now and how to help people here and now. History is always going to be beneficial to understand and know, but for me, it was I need to understand how people think, how people work. This kind of came back to what happened with my dad. I wanted to always ask that question of why, but I could never answer it because he wasn't here. So I pushed into sociology, kind of developing that understanding of why would people choose suicide? Why would people choose to go down these routes? What happens to people? And sociology really gave me that opportunity to study that kind of thing.
Yeah. So how long was that course?
Well, it was supposed to be 4 years, but I deployed in 2012. So it ended up being overall, I think it ended up being about a 6-year ordeal of trying to get through my full coursework. But I think I ended up doing it in either 3.5 or 4 years.
All right. So what happened to the history then? Did you get any qualification in the history?
No.
So you did it for 18 months. So you didn't get a chance to take an exam or anything to get qualification.
Yeah, it was
the sociology, and you pushed your way through that to get the degree.
Yeah, it was. So I was really in gen eds, the general education part of the United States curriculum. So we're heavy on general education before you kind of get into your specific like history or sociology. So I'd taken a couple of history courses, but it wasn't enough to qualify me for any kind of like associate's degree. Went to Whitewater and got that sociology degree in 2015. So it was,
So with your history degree, did you have to pay back any of that money that the National Guard had paid you to do?
No, because I finished those classes. I finished a year.
All right.
I finished a year of classes, and so once you do that, you're good. Like it's not like they're going to take that away from you.
Gotcha. And all the time that you're earning while you're learning, I guess, with the National Guard.
Not much, right? Like it's not much, but yeah, it's enough to kind of get by.
Yeah. So with your National Guard, then you said that at the end of 2015 you deployed. So is that with the UK? If you're a reserve, then you can get mobilised and go on a deployment, or you can sign up for a full-time reserve service contract.
Sure.
And depends on the type of contract, whether it's a full contract, you can deploy to an operational area, or we get home commitment, which is doing a job in the UK for that. So is it kind of the same with the National Guard?
It's a little bit different. We have, so like I give you 2 examples, right? I've been on 2 deployments and they're very different deployments. The first one in 2012 was a volunteer only deployment. All right. So we had a Wisconsin unit being kind of built, like it was called an agribusiness development team back then, that was going to Afghanistan, that was going to support like local Afghan governing officials of building infrastructure, developing new methodologies for doing the same thing. And so the biggest thing about that is that you obviously have to volunteer for that specific mission. So we'll get an email every once in a while and it'll be, hey, there's the 82nd ADT is looking for volunteers going to Afghanistan. And you simply sign up. They bring you in. They interview you. I had to do basically it was like 4 months of, I guess, tryout, right? So we had 6 or
pre-deployment training.
Yeah, I mean it was 6 or 6 or 7 other people that were alternates to the deployment, while they had about 60 people. And so like 5 or 6 of us, 5 to 7 of us, I can't remember exactly how many of us were alternates. So if anybody fell out or anybody was like, I don't want to go or can't go, we were going to be up next. And compared to this last deployment in 2019, we went to Afghanistan. That was my whole unit. My whole battalion went to Afghanistan based on the U.S. government was like, we're sending you,
Right.
2127, you guys are going to Afghanistan. From this time to this time, that's a government ordered mandate. This unit's going versus this unit's being built. Wisconsin requested to be a part of this operation of sending ADTs. So 60 of us signed up, and yeah.
So that first deployment then, where obviously you got through and you went to Afghanistan.
Mm-hmm.
So whereabouts in Afghan were you?
So I was in Kunar province, over on the east side of just north of Jalalabad.
Yeah, I know it.
Yeah.
So I did Kabul in 2002, and then I did 2 deployments to Helmand.
Yep.
I guess for you in that area, it's fairly benign at that sort of time.
You could say that. At that time, it was a few years after things like Lone Survivor happened. Like Lone Survivor happened in Kunar. Dakota Myers got his Medal of Honor there, so that was in the heart of the fire. Was his book. Like 3 at the time in 2012, 3 out of the 4 medals of honor that were given to U.S. service members happened in Kunar throughout the war. So it was like it was a very kinetic area, but 2008, 2009 was like Restrepo time frame. Hornet's Nest, like all sorts of documentaries and books were being written about this place in 2008, 2009, 2010. But then the ADTs and the PRTs kind of came in, and things started getting a little bit more, benign, as you say. And, as the Taliban understands, like when a PRT and an ADT comes in, we're bringing money. And so if they attack the PRTs, if they attack the ADTs, the organizations that they then coerce don't get money. And so what we found is that the Taliban wouldn't shoot at us. They wouldn't shoot at the PRTs because when we went to a specific province or a provincial district or the governor's mansion, like we would be having conversations that would be giving these people money that then the Taliban would extort or coerce money away from these guys. So it was basically taking away their own income source if they shot at us. And so to us, it was very benign because they knew who we were. They were like, that's the Grand Caravan. You don't want to shoot at that. Versus RCP, which is the route clearance package that we had in the province. They would blow them up all the time, right? I mean, we, not only them, but like SF would go into the Ganjigal Valley where Dakota Myers got his Medal of Honor. It was 2 miles away from our base, and we could watch the A-10 strafing the Taliban. They would get hit every single night. They would go in there every night. They would get hit every single night, and they would just, be laying waste to the Ganjigal. And so it was a very kinetic environment, but it seemed like we never saw that.
Yeah.
So it was a really interesting situation.
So how long you were there for?
We were
because you guys do a lot longer tours. You do a year tours.
Yeah. Back then it was 11 months for us, but we kind of got, at that time in the war, is really kind of split up. We spent 2 months in Kunar, and then we moved to Kabul for 3 months to do QRF, and then I got moved back to Kunar for the rest of the tour. But it was 11 months total.
Yeah, and obviously, did you have your own interpreters?
Yep.
Or you had local interpreters, obviously, same as us. And I mean, I was in psychological operations, so I worked really closely with my interpreters and really closely with people on the ground at the same sort of time. And you get close to these guys, and they become friends.
Right. Absolutely.
Yeah. So what happened when you came back from that tour then? You obviously survived it. And what was the next stage? You returned. Obviously, you get a big package to leave because you guys don't get R&R on the way through, do you?
We did actually back then. We did on my last tour in 2019. We didn't. So we came home February of 2013. Did about 10 days of post deployment kind of,
Decompression, we call it.
you could call it that, but it like back then and even now, like even 2019, there just really wasn't worth it. The decompression is basically you go to Camp Atterbury in Indiana and you go through finance course, you go through a reintegration course, you go through a number of different like trainings, right? And not necessarily always about things that are super beneficial. You're not in a place where you're really paying attention to, like I don't want to sit through learning how to go get a job again after a year of what we did for 6 hours, right?
Yeah.
With relatively few breaks. Like I just don't, nobody wants to do that. And so, there was few conversations back then about PTSD. It was a very short blurb. There's few conversations about trauma. There's very few conversations about, what has actually gone down in your body and what this actually has put you through. And so it was, back then, especially in the U.S. military, one of the biggest, I think, failures in leadership and culture back then was it was acceptable for leaders to say, if you say anything coming home, if you say anything about like PTSD, if you say anything about trauma, if you say anything about what you've seen, you're going to stay in demob is what we call it, demob longer. And you don't want that. Right. And so that kind of verbiage and that kind of discussion was, okay, well, if I talk about these things, then I have to stay here and talk about them more, and that won't be beneficial for me. And the conversation wasn't, you might have PTSD, and giving yourself 1 week, 2 weeks, 3 weeks here to dig into that conversation and dig into that diagnosis might actually really benefit you when you go home and speak to your families for the first time, because they don't understand it. So yeah, it was 10 days of that. And then we came home, and for me, it was back to school, right? That was the goal. And it was obviously right into the beginning of the semester. So I wasn't going to make it that semester. I was going to go back the next semester. Well, I went back to jujitsu, my jujitsu gym that I always loved to go to. And I was a trainer there. So I went back and I was teaching my first class, and a brand new guy I'd never met came in and we were doing a passing the guard drill, and he did a heel hook to me. And he dislocated my knee on literally the first moment I was back into the jujitsu gym. And so
it's a bit off, isn't it?
What's that?
That's a bit off.
Yeah, it was brutal. And so went to the hospital, got a x-ray, went and got an MRI a week later. My ACL was torn. And so obviously I looked at that, and I was in a situation where I was like, I don't know if I want to go back to school or if I want to go special forces and try to do something bigger for my country. And I found myself in a pretty deep hole of like, an ACL tear is something that you may not recover from, right? Yeah. You may not be able to retain your staying in the military and doing what you love doing. And so I was in a pretty bad situation. And at the time, because I was on active duty leave from my deployment, they sent me back to Fort Knox to recover, right? Because I was an active duty soldier, so I couldn't recover at home. They had to do it for me. And so I ended up they wanted me to spend a year recovering from this ACL tear. So I was going to get surgery, and then, average recovery time is 9 to 12 months. Well, I was in a place, I was like, that's not going to happen. I can't do that, right? I can't spend when I got to Fort Knox, I was like, this place is terrible, right? It's just not one, I just went through a deployment that was really difficult. I want to be around my family. It was terrible. And, I certainly had at least, if not a mild case, I had a mid-level case of PTSD of what I had seen. And not only that, but like the shock of the transition was really rough on me.
Yeah.
And I was alone. I was, Fort Knox I had a roommate, but he had a broken back. He had a broken leg. He had been blown up 35 feet up a mountain in Afghanistan by a bomb. Like, this guy was in rough shape. And so I'm sitting there looking at my situation, and I'm not sleeping because I had PTSD so bad that I just didn't know how to shut it off. I was sleeping probably 45 minutes a day, an hour a day, alone, right? So I'm thinking constantly. I'm thinking every second of the day for 23 hours, and it was exhausting. And I told myself, I'm like, you have to, excuse my language, but you have to get the fuck out of here.
Yeah.
And it was to the point of, you have to do this. What you have to do is you have to do whatever the physical therapist tells you. And they were like, the more you work, right, in a safe manner, the faster you get out of here. And I'm like, okay. So I started working out every day. I started doing push-ups and, lunges if I could. I started doing everything I could for my knee. Got the surgery, and then I was immobilized for a certain amount of time, but I was just slowly building up range of motion back in and building the strength in my leg again. And I was out of there in 7 months. When it was supposed to take 12, I did in 7. Came home and went back to school, went back to National Guard. And yeah, I mean, it was like, it was like it never happened. It was like the ACL tear never happened to me. Like I shut it out of my mind. I was like, I don't care how it feels. You're going to act like this never happened. You're just going to move on with your life.
So did you go back to the Jap slap classes, or did you mug that off?
I did. I went back to sociology, and tell you what, it was hard. It's real hard because it was like, it's two different environments. And I've spoken about this before, but not as much. Like, when you're sitting in a hyper conservative, and I don't necessarily mean that politically, there's a little bit of political nature in that, but like the conservative versus liberal mindset is just vastly different.
Yeah.
And there's benefits both ways. There's risks both ways. But I think when you step into the hyper conservative mentality of soldiers, right, of you have to do this to survive, and so feelings get pushed aside, which is absolutely necessary in situations. And then, you add on all the political complexity to it, but just the mentality of, this is what you have to do to survive, and if you don't do it, we're going to die. Versus the hyper liberal mindset of school, right? And sociology itself is a very liberal organization itself, where it's more about feelings. It's more about understanding, empathy, and being able to have those conversations openly and safely. In 2014, when I came back to school, it was brutal because I didn't fit in, right? Because I went from a super hyper conservative to focusing on talking about feelings and stuff. And I was like, I don't see the world in your vision, right? I don't see the world in your perspective. It just doesn't make sense, because I was just watching people die, a year and a half ago.
So how did you get out of that? Or did you stay in it? How did you adapt?
You know what, if anything, I didn't just stay in it. I doubled down on it, because I got my degree in 2015 for sociology. And keep in mind, I tore my ACL in early 2013. Tore my right ACL. So I tore my left ACL the first time. I tore my right ACL almost exactly a year later. And then
just to match the two up.
A year after that, I tore my right ACL again. So for 3 years, I was in the National Guard with torn ACLs. I had 2 ACL reconstructions while also dealing with sociology and trying to functionally refit myself from the hyper conservative nature of being a soldier into school. And it was a nightmare, right? But
Now, it wasn't the same bloke that did the first knee.
no, so I tore the second one doing an air assault mission, a training mission with the Guard. So yeah, it was unfortunate. It was a unlucky situation.
So let's move on a little bit then. So you got your degree, you got another torn ACL. You obviously recovered from that.
Yep.
At some stage. When did you sort of leave school, and what did you do before you deployed out again?
Yeah. So when I said I doubled down, I never finished because I actually went to graduate school after I got my undergraduate. So in 2016, I went to graduate school for sociology, and it was a love-hate relationship because I learned so much from it, but at the same time, it was such a contradictory. There were such contradicting environments in terms of going to drill every month and then coming back to school and just realizing like the students that come through, nothing against them, but they rarely have the experience to really back up what they're trying to study, and so certainly there's many intelligent students out there that are understanding of these things, but the trauma that is out there in the world is just in many ways. When I was researching and doing my work in my sociology graduate program, the study of violence was just not a question, right? It just wasn't a situation where people wanted to talk about, right? The sociology as a whole seems to look at violence as a marker of homicide, right?
Yeah.
Homicide rate is this, that means you have this much violence. And to me, it just didn't make sense because I saw a whole lot of many different kinds of violence. Homicide is just one part of it. It's the worst part, right? We're not talking about assaults. We're not talking about batteries. We're not talking about domestic violence, which is historically understudied, right? Yeah. And so it just wasn't a question. And we were having conversations about the brain. We were having conversations about human habits. We were having conversations about racism and classism and ableism. And yet we weren't talking about what I thought seemed to be the core, which was the relative use of violence, or the understanding of how people interacted with violence, to other people, or with that in mind within themselves. And it's a big, complicated situation that I'm still trying to understand. But it brought me a lot of internal conflicts with school itself, and I ultimately had to eventually just say, I don't know if I can do this anymore. And just so happened that I was thinking that, and then I got a call like 2 days later where they were like, "Hey, here's your notification for deployment to Afghanistan. We're going at the end of this year." And I'm like, well, I mean, I guess that makes my decision for me, right? Yeah. So I had to more or less drop out of school, go on the deployment so we mobilized in late 2018. And in between there, I was also, not only was I doing graduate school, but I was also being a firearms photographer and a firearms instructor as well. So I was doing a lot of odd jobs in there, but for the most part, I was doing school primary. And so we deployed early 2019 to Kabul, Afghanistan this time.
So you stationed, I guess that was, if you'd gone to Kabul, it was at the Sandhurst in the desert?
Say that again?
The Sandhurst in the desert, the West Point of the desert?
I mean, yeah, you could call it that. It was a pretty.
You were the training academy there. Or
Oh no, that was at Karga. We actually were there in my first deployment, but no, we had guys there from our deployment, but we had guys literally all across Afghanistan. We were part of the SFAB, the SFAB unit that's Security Force Assistance Brigade. It's basically teams across Afghanistan would support Afghan units to bettering themselves, being more efficient, leading or showing them how to lead their soldiers, making better decisions, all that stuff.
So basically, you're a training team to the Afghan National Army.
Yes, and we just so happen to be more focused for my specific team was actually Afghan police, I think. So we basically had to ensure that all the checkpoints around the green zone were secure, and that was our job. We were an engineer team, so we were building up the checkpoints, making them more secure, more focused around not letting bad people through.
Gotcha. So I spent 6 months in Kabul in 2002 in the early days, and we were at I was at the ISAF headquarters, which was at the university building, which was opposite the radio television Afghanistan. And in those days, I just myself and my interpreter, we could go out, just the two of us on the street, and just go and talk to people.
Can't do that anymore.
If I was going outside the city at all, then we had the Italians used to escort us up to Bagram, and went there a couple of times, which is just a dust bowl, terrible place.
Yeah. Yeah.
I quite enjoyed Kabul, and I quite enjoyed Helmand as well. I spent a lot of time bouncing around Helmand.
Yeah.
Particularly on my last tour.
Yeah.
So,
sorry about that. Don't worry about that. We're good. Yeah. I really, Kabul at the time in 2012 was, honestly, it was disgusting. I mean, in 2012, I think there were 5 million people in a city that was normally built for 2 million.
Yeah.
And so,
I think it's now actually, from the latest reports I've heard, I've got friends that are still there, and it's not a fun place to be at the moment.
No, and even in 2019, like it hadn't. When we got there in 2019, we were driving around on the same roads I had seen in 2012, and I was like, not much has changed. There was I think 1 or 2 roads that I was like, wow, they actually paved these this time. Because I remember, like, south of Kabul, there was a road in 2012 it was called Route Gray. I think it was called Route Gray, where you get about a mile off the turn from the main road onto Route Gray, and it was literally a 2-foot drop of cement to gravel. Like, I'm not even joking. It was a 2-foot drop, and they had a little gravel outlet around that so that the cars could go around. But it was like, we didn't even recognize that, we're our big MRAPs and we're driving, and all of a sudden my driver sees it but can't slow down in time, so we literally drop our front tires, and my gunner nearly flies out of the turret. But yeah, I mean, like that had all changed. They had built up that area a little bit more, but for the most part, the city looked exactly the same as it did in 2012 and 2019. So yeah, I mean, it's rough. Like I feel for the people. Like I wish more could be done. But Kunar was beautiful.
Yeah.
I mean, being in those mountains, it was almost elusively beautiful, because that they're beautiful mountains, but at the same time, that's where the people that are trying to kill you are hanging out.
I mean, down in sort of Helmand, I did quite a bit of work up in Kajaki and up the Sangin Valley, and it is a beautiful, beautiful country.
Yep.
And it's a fascinating country, and the people are fascinating.
Absolutely.
They're friendly and all the rest of it. And then you've got these other toe-rags that are trying to kill you all the time.
Yeah.
Or trying to blow you up. When all you're doing is just trying to make life better for the average Joe in a country. And
Yep.
and I think that's the bit that hurts a bit when there are people that are trying to stop you doing that.
Right. Yeah.
So 2019, you finished there, and you came back. So what happened? Because all the war fighting for us finished in 2014.
Yeah.
So you didn't get any war fighting at all. It was just support to the Afghans.
Yeah. Yeah, 2019. It was a comfortable deployment. Like we did over 100 missions, but the U.S. didn't want to send people out at that time, so
Yeah.
nothing really happened. There was pretty much our last mission. I thought about killing a guy. That was about the closest we came that whole 9 months that we were there to having any kind of situation. It just so happened to be on the process where we're bringing in the new guys and we're moving out. So that situation happened, and then we left, and nothing happened. Never felt really super stressed over there. And I came home and had a kind of to reprocess everything, kind of get through everything again.
Yeah.
Which was a challenge. But it wasn't like my first deployment. It wasn't the PTSD. It wasn't what, all the things I was trying to wrap my head around in terms of, the bodies I had seen and the injuries I had watched in retrospect. But this one, I came home and I was like, I felt in a really strong place, right? That's one of the things I really liked about deploying, is that when you come home, if you're able to really hone it in, you're actually in a remarkably strong place emotionally.
Yeah.
If you allow those emotions to lock themselves away, right? Because you were just overseas and you were able to talk to anybody you needed to talk to, or at least for me. Like I had really great guys, and I could talk to my roommate. He was a fellow E6 of mine. I could talk to him about anything, right?
Yeah.
If you come home and you don't find a place to do that, it becomes remarkably unstable. But
Yeah.
if you come home and you create the willingness and the courage and the ability to explain these difficult things that you just went through, you can build yourself into a remarkably strong person. And that's what I did. I had started having these conversations with my wife. I started having these conversations with, the fellow soldiers that I still had.
Yeah.
And I was like, you know what, I'm going to write my book. And so I started writing my book right after I got home. And I started focusing on trying to develop a better understanding of people, right? Going on with that sociology degree,
Yeah.
how people choose suicide, because I had almost chosen suicide in 2015. Helping people through mental health, helping people understand trauma, helping people, overcome, because I was in a remarkably strong place at that point. I had done so much work since 2015 of recognizing that I was struggling and recognizing what I was not doing. And so I started writing my book. I built a business, and COVID happened, right? And it seemed, I was posting on TikTok right around the same time COVID happened, and it was necessary, right? It was such an important piece of my journey here to where I am now. Within the first month, I had like 10,000 followers. Within the first 2 months, I had 30. Within the first 6 months, I had 150, I think. And then within the first 9 months, I had 300,000 followers.
Good grief.
And so everything I was talking about, everything I was sharing, all the things I put in my book, it all was hitting true to people. It was hitting people where it needed. I started a text platform where every day I send out an inspirational developmental text. It's obviously localized to here in the United States and Canada, but it was helping people, right? People responding with like, your texts are what I need every day.
Yeah.
They center me. They keep me going. They've helped me make better choices for myself. Your TikTok videos are always hitting me. And so I found myself, after being a very introverted person for my whole life, I found myself being inundated with hundreds of thousands of people following me and watching everything I post. And it's been a remarkably interesting experience. It's been a remarkably humbling experience to see, what I used to think are insecurities are people are like, these are your strengths, right?
Yeah.
I've always felt like my voice has always been an insecurity for me,
Yeah.
because I never thought I had a voice, right? After my dad died, I never felt like I could speak about anything. And so I shut that off. But the reality is that people love how I speak. They love my words. They love what I am trying to say to people and how I'm trying to say it. And again, it's been a super humbling experience of mine to go through all this and to see where this whole journey has come. And now I'm almost to 600,000 followers, and it's insane.
Well, so that kind of brings us up to today then.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
wow, that's remarkable.
Yeah.
That, yeah, I've really, really enjoyed this chat.
Yeah. I just, what I'm trying to do is just bring a real conversation to things that, in my beginnings, we couldn't talk about, right? We couldn't talk about suicide. We couldn't even bring it up because it was so foreign to people. And the reality is that we can't live in a world that doesn't want to talk about things. And so I'm always going to be an advocate for the willingness to express things, the willingness to expose things, right? But we have to do it obviously in a manner that is functional, right? Like I can't look at you, Tim, and say you're doing a shitty job with what you're doing. Like, I can't do that. The goal is I want to make you better. And so offer you what you're doing well and what you're struggling with, and see where we can go together. And that's, I think one of the biggest things that has helped me throughout my whole journey is that ability to say, right, this person's doing their absolute best to help people, to try, and maybe they have it wrong. Maybe they don't. Maybe I don't know. But what I do know is I'm not going to reach them if I attack them, right? And I've never tried to attack people. I've never tried to come at people. I have said, what if it's not that, right? What if it's not this? And so when people come to me, I don't care, right? Like when I do mental health coaching, I don't care if people lie to me, because I know what's going to happen, right? Like, everybody usually lies to me the first time we talk, because I ask, how are you? And they're like, I'm good.
Well,
and
that's a standard response to
right.
anybody.
Right. The reality is that
sometimes I someone says, how are you? Oh, well, my back's giving me some jip at the moment. Oh dear, and this and oh dear.
Right. And
I wish I hadn't have asked now.
Right. And the reality is like when I ask that question and people say I'm good, I'm like, well, you didn't come to me because you're good.
Yeah.
Right. And so it's not, when I look at that, like, it's not a bad thing to lie. It's a rational thing to lie. And I look at rationality in terms of there's a cause and effect, right? Anything you've ever been through in your life is rational, right? It makes sense. You chose to respond in a way that makes sense at the time. Now, when I get to that understanding, I always look at people and ask, is it logical anymore? Right. And that's where, you look at that interaction of, how are you? It's like, Tim, how are you? And you say, I'm good.
Yeah.
Right. Well, you didn't come to me because you're good. And now I ask, is it logical for you to maintain that same habit of saying I'm good to everybody just to push off don't push your problems onto them? And the reality comes kind of flushing out of them of like, you're right.
Yeah.
I'm here to talk about this stuff. I just don't know where to begin. And so a lot of what I do is kind of exposing people to words,
Yeah.
right? Exposing people to feelings that they haven't allowed
I
themselves to feel.
get somebody to open up first.
Yeah.
And to do that, I guess you need to gain their trust.
Yep.
So I think the natural response is to say, yeah, I'm fine, when clearly you're not.
Right.
But then you need to build out that rapport with the person that then
Yep.
you can open up to. And I guess that's the skill that you've
Yep.
clearly gained.
Yep. Yeah. And very simply, I'm there to validate feelings, and yet I'm also there to invalidate responses. Right? Because if you respond the same way you've always responded, you're probably not going to get better.
Yeah.
And so that's the hard thing about, doing my job. And I'm not I guess a qualified individual, if you want to be clear. Like, I'm not a therapist, I'm not a counselor, I don't have any degree in terms of, no license to help people. I'm just a person having conversations. And so I think that's always important to put out there. And I've always put that out there. But yeah, that's, I think, also something that's important about me is that there's a lot of people that won't go to therapists. There's a lot of people that just won't go to mental health professionals because they don't know what can happen with that. And knowing who I am opens them up to understanding that I can't do anything with the information you give me. Right. Which can be hard on me, but that's something that my perspective has to bolster. Right. Is that I'm not here to take on your problems, but you are absolutely able to express them.
Yeah.
And we will try and find a solution together. We'll try and find an understanding together. And so, yeah, it's been a remarkably humbling experience to help people through this process. I'm seeing so many incredible results in terms of, people becoming more focused on understanding themselves, more aware of who they are and who they want to be. I'm just going through so many different experiences, learning so many things about other people and all of the vast diversity of the human experience. And it's been remarkable.
Well, I think that has been fascinating. Thank you so much for coming on the show today.
I appreciate it, Tim.